Is that the only microphone?
It should be, yes.
Okay, does that have to be really close to us, or is it so big it probably doesn't?
It should be okay. With the essential oils, it was roughly that far away, and I think we were good. But do you guys mind? Can you hear me okay? Can you give me a thumbs up? Good. Okay, perfect. Thank you. I'm going to start in just a few minutes. Just wanted to test and make sure we were all good here.
I want to see how you left it then.
So they just come in when I open up. They're already there.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, that's new.
Yeah.
And on that computer, how many people can you see at once?
So it brings up the person.
There,
yeah, it brings up the person that's talking, but then we've got everybody up here.
And some people keep the video off, so it's easier.
Right. Yeah.
I don't want to go through all of COVID never having post.
All right. Okay. I'll just give it another couple of minutes here just to let everybody get in. It's working.
Just left and right.
Yeah, it's really easy.
So I can go back a couple slides if I wanted to for something.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. Oh, that's so exciting. We got a new remote, everybody. It's very exciting stuff. All right. Just give it another couple of minutes here. I can still see new people joining in. Okay. And if everybody wouldn't mind turning off their microphones just to make it easier for the sound. Thank you. Okay, it looks like we've got a good amount of people here now. So, whoops, I'll get started. Hi, everybody. So welcome to Bee Hotels with the Magnetawan Watershed Land Trust and the Burks Falls Library. I'm Cody. I'm the library coordinator for the Burks Falls Library. And we're just going to take you through the presentation today. So I'll introduce Mike. He's going to start us off. All right, so that's for you.
Thank you so much, Cody. My name is Mike Papard. I work with the Magnetawan Watershed Land Trust. I'm the Stewardship and Communications Coordinator. Now, the Land Trust is a not-for-profit charitable organization that is designed to help us preserve and conserve land around the Magnetawan Watershed. We purchase land, we receive land that is donated to us, we fundraise to purchase land. And basically, our mission is to preserve the natural, historical, scenic, and recreational value of the watershed for the benefit of future generations through land conservancy. So with no further ado, Cody and I are going to be talking about not just bee hotels, but the bees that tend to use bee hotels. Oh, I've got to use this clicker. Oh dear. Let's see where we are. Okay, there. The Magnetawan Watershed Land Trust. And moving on. So bees, what is a bee? We know it's an insect, but they're an insect that is rather closely related to wasps as well as to ants, which is a bit of a surprise to a lot of people.
Hey, Michael. Still seeing the meeting is being recorded.
Just one moment. I think, Bob, you're not on mute. So
I came off mute to tell you that there's a window that says this meeting is being recorded. It's right in the middle of the deck.
Yes, it is being recorded to share with other libraries.
No, but I just want the deck. Can you make has anyone else seen the? No, okay. It's just me then. All right.
We're good?
You may just have to accept
You may have to accept if there's a button that asks you to accept. Oh, yes, recording. You may have to hit the little button that says accept because your questions may be on here as well. So bees, I mean, we all know about bees. You know, they're best known for their role in pollination and, of course, in honey production, right? Now, the honeybee, the best known bee, is not a native bee species. It's a European species that has actually been domesticated and farmed around the world for both honey production and crop pollination. You've probably seen a lot of examples of where they will move large hives from orchard to orchard in order to pollinate the trees, which is fantastic. You can see the little pollen sacs on its leg there. It's actually collecting quite a bit of nectar, more nectar probably than pollen. They live in hives, large colonies. They produce the materials themselves. This is beeswax. They store honey in these. They also lay their larvae in similar cells as well. But the mason bee is different. They're solitary bees, so they don't live in hives. They don't have a queen, and they are much better pollinators than honeybees, which is quite ironic. They're more interested in pollen by far than they are in nectar. So their entire body are covered in hairs that collect the pollen. So they are literally can pollinate so many more flowers, so many more blooms per bee than any honeybee ever could. Because they're solitary bees, every single female can lay and produce eggs, unlike a queen bee would in a honeybee colony. They're our most common pollinator. We often think of honeybees, we think of butterflies, we think of moths and hummingbirds, but these are by far our most common pollinator, probably because we have at least 1,000 species in North America and probably almost as many in Canada alone. They often look different. They don't always, some are big, some are small, some are yellow, some are more iridescent blue. People will often mistake them for flies early in the spring, like little fuzzy flies in the spring. So we don't always recognize just how many of these mason bees that we actually have. So as with many things in nature, diversity is the key. So a diversity of pollinators supports a diversity of plants, including wild plants, flower gardens, and a great variety of crops such as apples, cherries, squash, pumpkins, and many more. So they go hand in hand. So if you have, if you want to have a diversity of native plants, you also need a diversity of pollinators. Otherwise, those plants will eventually not be reproducing. And similarly, if you don't have the plants, you won't have the pollinators. You have to actually have both in order to contribute to nature. One of the interesting little tidbits about the mason bee is they're not afraid of the cold and the wet the way honeybees are. So in the springtime, when apples are in bloom and cherries are in bloom, if it's a bit cold and wet, you're not likely to see the honeybees out there pollinating, but the mason bees will be out there, and they're that much more valuable to some of our crops than the honeybees are for that reason. And of course, they're threatened. Unfortunately, so much of our wildlife, whether it's birds, bees, insects, fish, amphibians, are threatened by literally the same list of causes you see here, habitat loss being absolutely number one. One of the nice things about being up in Magnetawan is we do have really intact, healthy nature. We have large forests, we have healthy wetlands, we have clean rivers, we have woodlands that stretch for miles and miles that can host black bears, wolves, moose, deer. And therefore, if you get a disease here or extreme weather there, it doesn't take out everything because there's so much more area that can recover, help it to recover, versus, you know, Southern Ontario, Southwestern Ontario, where tree cover can be as low as 4% in an area, heavily agricultured, lots of pesticides. These species like the mason bees are going to struggle to survive. But you can help. Pollinator gardens, that really helps. Even living up north here, even though we have so much nature around us, we have to remember that this is probably a refuge for a lot of these species. One of the reasons that the mason bees are surviving is because up here on the Canadian Shield, we don't have as much farmland, as much cities. A lot of these insects are actually thriving up here, whereas you go just south of the Severn Bridge and you would probably see a really big drop in the population and certainly the diversity of insects and plants once you get down into the more developed lands of Ontario and even further south. So try not to use pesticides and herbicides on your property. You can always use a bottle of soapy water for those aphids on your roses. keep as much of your property natural as you possibly can. It just adds to the diversity and it attracts pollinators. So the more natural the periphery of your property is, the more likely you are to get a great diversity of mason bees and other pollinators into your area. And you can build a bee hotel. We'll be pointing one out a little later. So on working through this with Cody, looking at, how do you build a bee hotel? What are the best ways to do it? There's a lot of YouTube videos out there that aren't really good for the bees. They're simple, easy crafts you can do, but in the end, it's not what the bees need. So what the bees really need is for you to do your best to mimic the conditions that they would find in nature. They will go into any little gap, any little tunnel, any little tubular area they can find, but the ones that are more natural are the better. They will nest in your brick wall. They will nest in your eaves. I've heard stories of them trying to nest in keyholes in doors. They're very, very attracted to these nice tubular areas. But naturally speaking, they sort of like beetle holes in wood or really pithy stems. You'll see a lot of people will make bee hotels out of bamboo shoots because they're really long and narrow and they can use those, as well as brush piles, cavities in buildings, and so on. Now, the bee life cycle, there are many, many different species of mason bee, but for all intents and purposes, their life cycle is very, very similar. It just changes a little bit depending on how far north they are, how far south they are. But let's start with essentially in the springtime, the males emerge first. They come out, I'll tell you why later. They come out first and they start hunting for nectar. They're out for maybe 2 weeks before the females come out. As soon as the females emerge, they immediately mate. And the female's first job right there and then is to go collect pollen. And as we saw from that earlier photo, she can do that quite effectively. She uses that pollen then to feed her larvae and bring it back to her nest. She takes this is a nice side cross section. It was probably a manufactured bee hotel. So you can see here, she's collected a huge lump of pollen, which is a great food source, very high in protein, stuffs it at the very end of the tube as far down as she can get, and she lays one egg on that. And then she goes and she collects mud and sand and leaves and packs it all in to create a sealed off chamber for that one egg with its pollen. Hence the term mason bee. A mason bee essentially is any bee that will use natural material to help it create its nest. So the species depends upon how much leaves they use or how much mud they use. So once she's done that, she's backfilled it with mud, sand, chewed leaves. She repeats the process again 4, 5, 6 times. Each time she's laying a female egg. When she gets to near the end of the bee tube, we'll call it a bee tube, she lays 1 or 2 males. So this is also of critical importance if you're making your own bee hotel, because if you make the tubes too short, she'll only lay females. And then she'll go to the next tube and only lay females, and there'll be no males left to emerge. She does this because she wants the males to come out first, spend a week or 2 feeding on the nectar before the females emerge the next spring. So she only lives about 4 to 6 weeks. And about the time she's done, the eggs start to hatch in the tubes. And they spend that season till it gets really cold, eating that pollen. And depending on the species, they'll stay a larvae or turn into a pupa. And that's the stage they'll stay over the wintertime. And some point in the spring, when it starts to warm up, they'll gradually emerge as a full-grown mason bee. And then they got to chew their way out in sequence. And I don't know whether the last one gets out last every time, but that's basically the way they get out of there. And the cycle starts all over again. One issue with this is when a female emerges, she'll often want to go back to the exact same tunnel to lay her own eggs, which is a problem in nature as well as with bee hotels, because over time, predatory mites start to build up in these bee nest cavities, and eventually the eggs won't survive. So you'll be learning later that it's best to clean out the tubes every single spring. Once, as soon as she's emerged, most people who have these will watch for her to come out, watch for the last one to come out. They'll immediately clean it, replace it, so that the next set of bees can begin laying their eggs in there. So here we go. Cody, I think you're up now. Here's a picture of a bee hotel we have, which I think we can use for Q&A at the end, just in case you have any questions about the details. Thanks so much.
Sorry. All right. Okay, so some good housekeeping. What you need to know about purchasing bee hotels, you really need to watch out for mass-produced bee hotels. Cheap bee hotels can actually be death traps for our native pollinators and often create unsafe and poor living conditions that can lead to mite infestation, mold, and disease. So look out for nesting blocks, tubes, and reeds that are glued in and not removable, nesting tubes that open at the back, reeds with large splinters in them, and roofs that lack overhang. All of these things can harm our pollinators, and we don't want to purchase those. So if you do already own a cheap bee hotel and it looks like it's full, just leave it until all of the bees have cleared out, and then get rid of it and don't use it next year. So I've got a little flow chart. I won't go through all of it with you, but it's just letting you know like what is appropriate for a bee hotel and whether or not you should really be purchasing this type of bee hotel. So buy or don't buy. And creating a healthy bee hotel. So according to the David Suzuki Foundation's website, when purchasing or building a bee hotel, there are a few factors you need to keep in mind. First, look at the label. Is the right kind of bee actually on the label? If you see a honeybee on there, you don't want to purchase that bee hotel because those homes are made for solitary bees like mason bees and leafcutter bees. Removable tubes or trays. Tubes need to be replaced every year, like Mike was saying, to prevent mites and mold. If the tubes are glued in, like I said before, you don't want that hotel. And then nesting tubes that close at one end. You need the tubes to close at one end to keep out parasites and predatory creatures. And then you need your nesting tubes to be at least 15 to 17 centimeters long. Anything shorter than that, and like Mike said, you'll end up with mostly female bees, and you won't end up with many males. So we need to keep that in mind and make sure those tubes are long enough. And then they should be at least 0.79 diameter, just for the mason bees. Different types of bees prefer different sizes. So you're gonna wanna do some research on that. And then no slivers or sharp edges, and a roof with an overhang so no water gets in to create mold. And you want a solid attachment or mount. So homes shouldn't be dangling in the wind. They need to be secured to a stake or the side of your house. We want to make sure those bees are protected. And breathable nesting tubes. So you don't want to use glass, you don't want to use plastic straws, nothing like that. The preference is actually paper because they can be removed and cleaned. If you're going to use something like bamboo, they actually recommend that you put paper inside of the bamboo stalks so that same thing, you can remove them and clean the stalks so you don't get mites or mold or anything like that. Okay, so making a simple bee hotel, you're going to want paper bee tubes or the bamboo canes, like I said, but think about putting paper in those. You'll want them to be a depth of roughly 16 centimeters and a diameter ranging from 7 millimeters to 12 millimeters. You want a plank of untreated wood with a width of 12 centimeters and a length of no less than 125 centimeters. You're going to need a drill and some bits and self-tapping wood screws. So cut the plank into 5 lengths of 25 centimeters and piece them together using the drills and screws to make an open-fronted box with a long back panel. Drill a hole in the long back panel so you can fix it to the wall, and sand off any rough edges and place the tubes or bamboo canes in the box. You want to hang the box securely, like I said, and you want to put it in a south or east facing area so it gets plenty of morning sun. They don't like the north facing, they don't like all that cold. And then make sure all the tubes are pushed back against that wall. You want to create that seal so that nothing's getting in the back to get those bees. And make sure they're protected from the rain. What more can we do to help pollinators? So I think Mike covered some of this already. You can check out our previous workshop on native plants and gardening and growing a variety of regional native plants that flower throughout the year. You might also want to think about providing a shallow water dish with perching stones in your yard, and then change out the water regularly so that it's good for bees, but not mosquitoes. Participate in No Mow May. So I did that this year and my lawn was covered in dandelions, but it was also covered in bees. Leave an area of undisturbed plants, fallen leaves in your garden. Open areas of soil for nesting, mud puddling, sheltering, and overwintering. And maintain your outdoor spaces in an earth-friendly way by avoiding pesticides. Okay, we sped through that really quickly. Yes, questions, anybody?
More time for questions.
Yes. Hold on, I'll slide over. All right, everyone. So you're welcome to turn on your mic now and ask questions, or I'll go to the chat here and see if we have any questions there. We've got some people sharing where they are in the world.
Cool.
All right. So questions, anyone?
We could perhaps show the Bee Hotel itself.
I'll tilt that down there.
This is quite complex. It's like a bird feeder, basically, in shape. But you'll see the inner lid comes off. And then this is neat. They have several layers of this. They drill these grooves in them and they put cardboard tubes filled with paper tubes so that after the first emergence, you can pull these paper tubes out. I don't want to do it, I'll wreck it. And then it's clean to go. You can replace it with more paper or use the tube for the second one. You can see that even though it's open at the back, there's lots. The back of the bird box itself is closed off. And this is the design I've seen the most that has been the most popular on YouTube for these bees.
And I see the question there, how high should the Bee Hotel be off the ground? I believe in one of my previous slides, I believe it said 1.5 meters off the ground. So you want it high enough that predators can't get to the Bee Hotel.
Like skunks.
Skunks, yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Can we see everyone? Feel free to unmute yourself if you have a question and just speak up.
Where can you purchase bee hotels?
I got this one. Well, I got this one from another library, and it was produced by a custom guy down in Lake of Bays at the Logging Chain Lodge. He makes these ones, but I think quite a few people do make them. It's best to Google online.
Oh.
We just informed that you guys can't see us, so we're just going to try and get ourselves onto the screen here.
Where do bumblebees live?
Where do bumblebees live?
Where do bumblebees live? That will be answered at the next presentation of bumblebees. I'm uncertain about that one.
They nest in bowl-shaped areas, and I can send you some information on that. I did a little tiny bit of research on bumblebees ahead of time, but we'll look into that. Is there a limit to the size or number of holes a hotel can have?
Not really, because every female will keep laying until she's done, and another female will come in if the holes are empty, and she'll use those. There's probably competition between them for them, so the more you have, the better.
Mm-hmm. And when you have a hotel like this that just has the holes for mason bees, that's perfect. You often see lots of hotels that have
multiple sizes.
Yeah, multiple sizes and other paraphernalia in there, like I was talking about pine cones earlier.
Yeah.
And in my research, it said, don't actually add those pine cones in. They're better for bugs and not so much bees. So you might actually be attracting mites and things that you don't want in that area.
It's like building a bluebird box and finding out there are starlings living in it
Yes.
instead. So there are certain rules to follow, but you can probably have several of these bee hotels around your property. Even if you have lots of trees and natural stuff, it'll keep them away from your house. It'll keep them from nesting in the little grooves between your bricks and stuff like that as well, which is always nice.
Are paper straws okay to use?
I would say if they're paper straws, I would say yes.
I think so. Yeah. I'm just looking at this and thinking about the paper straw that I used earlier today, and they are roughly the same size. So I think it would be okay. Yeah. It's
really just avoiding plastic because, again, the humidity and mold builds up. And because these little creatures have to overwinter in these things, they can't escape. They can die from disease in the middle of the winter time from stuff like that.
Mm-hmm. And the bee hotel that I showed in the pictures on here is great, but actually I think the one that Mike brought is even better just because of the way it's built. Sorry. With the wood all around. So that's more protection for the bees than just having those paper straws sort of all shoved in together. So that's something you might want to think about.
I like the point about making sure it's secured against a wall, because a lot of them you see are hanging.
Yes.
Imagine that blowing around all winter time in the storms we get up here, and you have a bunch of dizzy bees out.
Yes.
So we have a large property. How many bee hotels do we need?
Oh my goodness. Well, Michael, this is my dad. Your 200-acre property, I think you could do quite a few bee hotels.
1 per acre.
1 per acre. Yeah, that sounds good. All right. Questions from anyone else? Okay.
Stay tuned for more invitations.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you so much, everybody, for participating. That was really great. And hopefully we'll see you again soon. And I have been recording this meeting, so I'll be sending out the recording of it, hopefully early tomorrow or late this evening.
Perfect.
All right. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much.
Bye.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.